Thank you, Kari. Now we will begin the Q&A. Just as a reminder, audience members can submit your questions using the Q&A Zoom Q&A feature. You can also click on questions, click on the Q&A feature, type your question in the dialog box and click send. You can also look at other attendees' questions. All attendees will be able to see your questions, and you can like or upvote other attendees' questions if you want to see them answered. This will help us identify popular questions. Click the thumbs up icon to indicate a question you would also like answered. So we will watch to see, hopefully, plenty of questions come in. We have all kinds of time here, plenty of attendees. So please, if anything's on your mind from that wonderful presentation, post a question. We did get one question at the beginning of the presentation, which TIDC has already answered and forwarded to the rail researchers to get back to them. It was about MaineDOT's position on rail and how it interacts with UMaine and TIDC research decision making. I am not directly involved in rail decisions long term, but I would point people to the Maine State Rail Plan and the Long Range Transportation Plan for some of that. And I would also say that keep in mind that as a general rule, research can be something used to guide decision making. So there's many ways to use research. No questions yet. Give people a little bit more time. There's probably some typing out there. Here's one. Do you have any immediate plans for additional track structures in your test bed area, and what types?
Thank you. Good question. Right now, as it stands today, we are finishing up the last of that track infrastructure. At this point, we don't have any immediate plans to add to the track infrastructure. We recognize that the size of our loop is not what it used to be, but we also recognize that FRA has a facility that has a 13-mile loop that in the event we need to do work at higher speeds or need longer loop, there's always the opportunity to use that great industry resource. So we don't have any right now. I think one piece of infrastructure that we are looking at is a test bed for the ultrasonic technologies, the vehicles that run over the rail to do inspections. There is probably an industry need for being able to evaluate those test systems. So that is something that's on the horizon, but I wouldn't say it's the immediate horizon.
Well, thanks for that info. We have another question. How do universities get involved with MXV rail research?
Oh, good question. Thank you for asking that one. Our university program that we have that's funded through the Strategic Research Initiative program operates under what we call a Grand Challenge program. So on an annual basis, we put out a request for proposals. This means that if you have a great idea for a freight rail project, you can submit that. Our team evaluates the proposals and provides funding for the best proposals. Again, we're taking proposals on an annual basis, but that does not necessarily mean that the program has to be completed in a year. So I think the university program is funded at about $1 million that we're providing to universities for their research. So Scott Cummings is our AVP of Research and Innovation. He leads that program. And he's pretty easy to find if you look on our leadership page on mxvrail.com. But if you need more information, feel free to contact me directly as well.
Thanks for that response, Kari. That's the questions we have open right now. Give people a little bit more time. I'm sure there's a couple more out there in people's heads.
Yeah, I have a tendency to go through a lot of material very quickly. We just have so much going on, so
it's a lot. It's very interesting to me.
What to talk about.
We have another question in. You mentioned MGT in your talk. What does that stand for? This person may have missed it.
Yep, that is million gross tons. So annually, we are trying to get 140 million gross tons. We typically achieve that by running anywhere from 6 to 8 months out of the year, depending on how things are going. We have a train that Union Pacific donated. So we have coal cars that are loaded to 315,000 pounds per car. Typically, we run anywhere from 90 to 115 cars a night, just depends on what the operation is looking at. So again, the purpose of running heavier loads consistently throughout the year is to accelerate the amount of information that vendors and suppliers are getting so that they can make product improvements sooner than if they tried to install it on a revenue service line that's maybe getting 20 to 30 MGT a year.
Gotcha. Got a couple more coming in now. They're flowing a little bit. Your facility serves a wide range of U.S. railroads geographically. Can you recognize any unique challenges in the New England railroad system?
So I think one of the yes, first of all, we help represent all of the railroads in the U.S. And just as a note too, we do work globally, and part of the great thing about MXV Rail is that by making those global connections, we have a tendency to be able to learn from the global community and bring that back to the US and apply those learnings to things we're seeing in the US. From a New England perspective, obviously, one of the things that's consistently challenging is cold in the wintertime. Winter operations are generally a bit more treacherous than from a component condition. And so there's just some specialty things that we have that helps us understand cold. I didn't mention in one of our capabilities in our laboratory, we do have a cold room. That cold room has capability to go to, I think, negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. What we're doing right now is looking at brake valves and brake performance in cold weather conditions. So I think some of those are directly applicable to what you would see in the New England area. The other thing I would mention in that is that, our DNA has been in freight, but we do consistently provide a lot of support to passenger and transit rail systems. A lot of the time that's looking at very specific, either longevity recommendations for longevity of components, so wear properties, or if they're having a specific issue with maybe wheel profile or track geometry in segments of the track due to some of the varying weather conditions. So that work is more on that consulting engineering side than probably on the research side.
Gotcha. Is the primary reason for the focus on freight the weight and the forces that get involved and how the track interacts with those situations?
I would say the primary driver for the freight focus was, that was who we were born from. Like I mentioned in the presentation that in the early 1940s, AAR was already starting to do research, and that really built on a legacy of providing research and innovation in the industry. So we actually went as TTCI began and started to evolve, and now into MXV Rail. At one point in time, it was purely freight. So when we started to work more closely with the FRA at the old facility, I think that's when some of the passenger and transit came in. We had people from the global community. At one time, we were testing some Japanese high-speed trains. They were at the old facility for 2 or 3 years doing some of their testing. So over time, we were able to gain subject matter expertise outside of just freight rail, sorry. So I think, we've grown as an organization into exploring and supporting other rail operations, but our heart and DNA will still always be in freight.
Great explanation, thanks. Now we have a couple more questions coming in. Is MXV involved with any advanced structural materials, for example, fiber reinforced polymer composites? And if so, what type of applications?
That's a really great question. Thank you for asking that one. The simple answer is yes. From an application standpoint, there's probably more than I can come up with on the top of my head, but one thing that's very interesting to me in terms of advanced materials or just repurposing materials from a sustainability perspective is in ties. We have seen a lot of new tie manufacturers coming in with different products, anywhere from plastics to bamboo, you name it, we've been testing it. So I think the track infrastructure, particularly in ties, is an area where we're seeing that. I will say, though, that some of the materials that we're using in bridge decks are starting to explore different polymers to see how those pads are transitioning load from the vehicle into the bridge deck. So you would be surprised at how many different material studies we're doing in different applications of rail. I think those are a couple of good examples, but like I said, I probably have team members that are going to shake their head and be like, why didn't you say this?
That's great. As you know, Maine is heavily involved in composites with their composite center, so it's good to know that the ties there.
Yeah, certainly. We actually have I think it's 3 different manufacturers that are testing composite ties right now. So if you get out to the annual review, you'll actually be able to see those installed in track and kind of get a good look at them.
It's good advertisement for the in-person
Yeah.
event. So we have another question in. Are you doing any testing with RCF type defects, more so high-speed rail and different rail steel types?
That's an excellent question. I love these. They're very technical. Yay. So yes is the question or the answer to that. I did mention that rolling contact fatigue simulator that we designed and built in combination with MTS. That machine right now is unique in the world. I do think that I've heard that our friends in Japan are starting to consider building one, but that particular machine is wholly focused on understanding wheel rail contact conditions that are generating RCF. We have an extensive background on RCFS in passenger systems. We did a lot of work in the UK probably 10 or 15 years ago to understand RCF generation, what were the causes and variables. So that's one area where, kind of getting back to that earlier comment about how we support transit and passenger agencies, those types of studies are very possible, not only with real world scale testing at our research facility, but also a lot of the work that we do in simulation space. So we have a software called New Cars. It is available for university students that are wanting to explore it. It's a vehicle dynamics software, really helping to understand and explore conditions under which RCF is going to be generated. Take that out of the simulation space and into the testing space with the RCFS. And then again, taking that out of the testing space and into what I would say more revenue service style testing. We've done studies all over the world on RCF generation. So I like to say that we have some very well-known and leading experts in that field. And unfortunately, I think it's one of those fields that's going to be around forever because materials are consistently changing. I talked a little bit about the metallurgy lab that we have, and we invested in that strategically because we knew that material properties are continuing to advance. And if we can reach that optimum match between wheel rail to make that interface, both of those components last longer, is a really big win for operating railroads from a capital investment perspective. So definitely something that we're consistently looking at and have all the tools available to us to help explore as new materials come into play.
Yeah, I think that the pursuit of the perfect material combinations will be ongoing for maybe forever, as you were saying.
Quite some time. Well, because there's always just new things coming in. And, the other piece of that is just the wheel rail profiles. We've done a significant amount of research on what the optimum condition or optimum profiles are. So many variables, so much advancement, which means that you're absolutely right. It's going to be a subject that'll be around for quite some time.
So we have no questions that are open right now, but I have one question is, does your program look at how different types of freight in transportation impact the research in any way or impact the rail system? Like, for instance, if it's the timber industry or potatoes or whatever it is, does that seem to have an impact, or is it just kind of standard weight in transit?
I would say that falls more on our counterparts at AAR. They do a lot more data analysis on commodities and availability of commodities to support the infrastructure investment needs. I'm trying to remember, I feel like they have a subscription-based tool that allows you to kind of look at commodities. I will have to get back with my friend Louisa at AAR to understand if that's available to the public or via subscription, but there would be some very interesting information for you in there if you can get accessibility to it. So I'll follow up with her and see what's available and get you a note.
Great, thanks. So we have some more time, but there's no more questions that are open. So I don't know if we want to turn to TIDC, if we should continue to the next session, or if we should wait for more. Oh, we go. We got another question. All right. I noticed the bridge structure in your presentation. Railroad bridge structure technology is very old and proven. Do you think that FRP composite girders currently being used in state highway bridges due to longevity, low maintenance, and local manufacture might be considered for discussion?
Certainly. I 100% agree that the bridge infrastructure in the total of the U.S. from a rail perspective is probably one of the oldest pieces of the network. But I also will say that most of them are very robust. We do have a bridge section in our facility for accelerated service testing. That particular bridge deck, I believe, is a concrete deck that was donated to us by one of the railroads. We're looking at different, I would say, the track components on top of the deck, the pads, fasteners. At this point, we're not looking at, as far as I know, at FAST with any composite bridge decks. But I do know that the industry is consistently looking for opportunities to either extend the longevity or improve the performance over bridges, particularly as you're starting to see some of the longer trains and heavier cars that are being transported across the country. So I think as the railroads are considering upgrades or replacement for bridge decks, it's something that would be on the horizon, but we don't have any active programs through the SRI program right now.
Gotcha. That was that question. I'm curious, could you go into a little bit more detail? You just went through this big overhaul and you've constructed all kinds of test tracks and whatnot. Can you get into like the influence that the state DOTs and these other agencies have in the decision making of what's constructed and when you work on those?
Certainly, that was actually an interesting question, and one that as we were having to select a location for moving our operations to, it was something that we took into great consideration. When we started to explore options, we were looking in Florida, we were looking in Texas, obviously places with more land availability than anywhere in Maine. But one of the things that we need to take into consideration was the ability to conduct our operations in a way that was consistent with what the industry expected. And traditionally, that means that we're a controlled test environment that doesn't necessarily, can't actually, if we're exploring new technologies and new opportunities, we can't stay within what an operating railroad would be restricted to from a FRA and regulatory perspective. So we were fortunate that we ended up finding the place right down the way in Pueblo-Plex, which is an Army depot that is going into closure, getting handed over to Pueblo-Plex, which is an economic development company. And because the operations are closed to interchange, we don't have any of the restrictions that would be required for, say, an operating railroad. So very convenient for us to be able to, and absolutely necessary for us to be able to continue the great work that we do on behalf of the industry, to have a location that wasn't necessarily influenced by the outside regulatory environment for interchange. I will say that it is, however, very important for us to stay connected with all of the local communities across the U.S. to understand the challenges that they're seeing in their freight rail systems. So working with some of the state agencies, we've not only been able to support them with our Security and Emergency Response Training Center to get those emergency responders trained up in the event that there is an incident, but also understanding if there's particular pain points, how do we work with those state agencies to be able to resolve some of those through testing and research.
Great. We go back to a question that you answered before about the specific challenges in New England, and you talked about the cold environment testing room. Can you get into a little bit more what that's like? Is that like a very small area with an accelerated testing equipment? What does that look like?
I would compare it to an oversized refrigerator. So it's like okay, here we go. Have you ever seen one of the walk-in refrigerators at a restaurant? It's similar to that. I mean, obviously our chamber is significantly larger than what you'd see in a walk-in restaurant, but ultimately that's the idea, right? We have a closed chamber that's heavily insulated, that we're able to tightly control the temperature so that, if we're looking at cold weather studies, we can really mimic the environment. The other area that I didn't talk about that we do some of the, I would say specific to various areas in the US type of testing is on the RCFS. Obviously, there's lots of foliage during the fall and getting into winter. All of that foliage can cause various conditions from a lubrication perspective in that wheel rail contact. So we're also able to look at what I would say was kind of weather conditions, or the results of weather conditions in the RCFS with the varying the coefficient of friction using different lubrications. We actually did, a leaf study, like, okay, what is the coefficient of friction when there's leaves on the rail? How does that impact the traction ratios? And so we also have that piece of it. But kind of going back to the cold room capability, I talked a little bit about the brake rigging that we're looking at, but we also had one of our Class 1 railroads that they had a problem with locked axles. And they had one of their team members that came up with a design to unlock the axle, basically. And so one of the tests that we were running on behalf of that railroad is how does that particular piece of equipment handle cold weather conditions. And so we were looking at taking measurements on fatigue and just the forces that were being imparted as you're using the pieces of equipment in that particular cold chamber. So lots of different uses. I'm trying to figure out, I don't know exactly the size, but I mean, it's sizable. Takes up a whole little corner in our research laboratory. So it's nothing to sneeze at.
That's a great explanation, and it's interesting to hear the considerations such as leaves falling and how that contributes to something that I wouldn't have thought of, but could be
Things you
big
don't think about,
factors.
right? Things you don't think about until they're causing you headaches.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, someone asked the question and it's like, well, we better find out that answer, right? So you shared the technology digest, which I think that's an enviable, searchable kind of database. I think a lot of databases suffer to put something together like that. Is there another best way for people that are on the call today to kind of just keep tabs about what's going on at MXV?
Yeah, I think the best way is via LinkedIn. We are very active on LinkedIn, and not only do we talk about our upcoming events, but we also talk about publications and a lot of the work that we're doing on the commercial side, as long as our customers okay it. So it's a really great place to be able to at least have a starting point. Our website is always up to date. We have a lot of case studies that we're starting to produce, and like you mentioned, the technology digests that are available if you want to get into a bit more technical detail. But I would say LinkedIn is probably a really good place to keep an eye on the ongoings at MXV Rail.
Wonderful. I see that was all the time we have for questions, but I really appreciate the conversation and all the knowledge that you shared with us, Kari. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you all so much.